Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team to reduce the potential for fraud, compliance fines, and just overall bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. U.S. banks merge, get acquired, or fail, and often. Now, this is not something that your vendor normally makes their clients aware of. So, if you want 3 ways to find out that your vendor's bank's routing number has changed before fines or return payments, keep listening. Welcome to episode 394. Your vendor's bank routing numbers do change. 3 ways you can find out before Nacha fines or returned payments. So I don't know if you guys remember, but back in 2023, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 banks that closed or failed. And I don't think it's not the like all the banks of a franchise. It could just be a branch of the bank, or maybe that's the only branch of the bank, and or maybe it's all the branches of a particular bank. But banks do fail. And so there were 5 of them in 2023. And you may remember the first one. It was Silicon Valley Bank, and then it was Signature Bank. And then later on in the year, there were more. And so why do I bring all of this up? Well, because when banks close, or when they are merged or acquired, and most banks that are closed, by the way, are acquired by another bank. But when banks close, when they are failed, when they get acquired by another bank, or when they merge with another bank, that routing number changes. And because that routing number changed, that means that the routing number that you have on file, the old one that you may have on file in your vendor master file on the vendor applicable vendor records, and it's plural because many of your vendors may share that same bank, that needs to be updated, because when you send that routing number, bank account number, when it is pulled from the vendor record into the ACH or the wire file, the electronic file that goes to the bank, the expectation is that the routing number and bank account information that you sent up there or that you sent in the file is valid and will result in a successful payment. When that number is not valid, you or your organization, I should say, may be susceptible to fines, and then you and your team may be susceptible to rework because, that payment may come back, and now you have to go back in, update the routing number, reset, uh, uh, resend the payment. And of course, that results in a delay, and your vendors may not be happy. So, the best way around that is to make sure that you always have updated routing numbers in your vendor master file. Now, let me just clarify here. I am focusing only on US routing numbers that are for the US. I know Canada has routing numbers, and other countries have like the business identifier code, or BIC. And then there's also a UID number for chips. There's also, and chips is also US, but non-US, they're the IBAN numbers. But the thing is that I am still searching for some resources to validate changes. So I was able to find it for the US, so I'm going to give those to you now. But look forward in the future to the same thing just for non-US banks. All right, so let's get started with why you definitely want to make sure you find out about changes and get them updated in your vendor master file. And kind of already gave it away before Nacha fines or return payments. So starting with Nacha fines, if you do not make updates in your vendor master file to the routing numbers that are included with the pay files that go to the bank, the bank has that information. And I don't know if it's your bank, the ODFI, the originating depositor um, financial institution, or your vendor's bank, the RDFI, the receiving depositors financial institution. So I don't know which bank does it, but they have that information and they will make the change. But you know what? They are not going to make that forever. And eventually, if you do not change it, whichever bank is continuing to make that change, they will report it to NACHA as a violation, and they will return that payment as unsuccessful. So now you got to go find the bank, the new routing number anyway. So why not just do that prior to the bank that is continues to make that change? Why not just do it prior to that bank issuing, right, submitting that violation, and then also returning the payment? So I recommend that you use one of these three ways to find out. And one of them really is not under your control, by the way. So you really only have two ways. But you know what? It might work. And that's the first one, is the vendor tells you. So the first of the three ways is that the vendor lets you know. Now, they probably won't, because most of the time when this happens, when the routing number happens, again, it could be part of a bank fail, it could be a merger or acquisition. When that happens, the most of the time their bank account number doesn't change. And so if their bank account number doesn't change, then they don't have to worry about, in their minds, right, submitting the mere routing number change. And keep in mind too, you guys probably know this just like I do. A lot of them don't pay a lot of attention to the routing number anyway, because we know in the US, some banks will issue a separate routing number for ACH payments versus wire payments. And a lot of times the vendors will get that wrong too. And so they don't pay a lot of attention to it. As long as their account number doesn't change, they will continue to send you a voided check, because if that's what you require, right, they got to check the box. They will continue to send you that voided check that has a routing number on it from, I don't know, two mergers ago, because they're not writing checks anymore, and so they got checks to spare. They're not going to order new ones, and they're just going to keep giving you those old ones with the old routing numbers on it. So they don't pay attention to that. They may tell you, and I will say that if they do tell you, make sure you get that updated, and not just their vendor record. If you are made aware of a routing number change, do some additional research to see if you need to make a change with other vendors that have the same bank. Now, I will have, and I will link a vendor master file tip of the week where I talk about US routing numbers. So make sure you click on that if you're interested. But the key here is that if you have other vendors that share that same bank, then you just want to be proactive and make sure that you are updating them if applicable. And when I talk about do some additional research, those resources will be the third way. But until we get to that, let's go to the next one. So the next one is you find out because you get a notice of change or NOC. We used to call these knocks. And so what these are is if your bank has to make a change to your uh, routing number that you sent in your pay file, they're actually going to let you know that they made the change, and it's going to they're going to send you a notice called notice of change. And so when you receive these notices, and however you receive it, back in the day we used to get a fax, but nowadays it probably goes to an email address. Make sure somebody is working those, because it means that the information, the banking details that you sent in that pay file are something needs to change. Something was wrong. And so that is your hint and a half that you need to change, update your vendor's record, and then do some additional research to see if you have to update other vendor records. And if you don't do that, if you do not process those notice of changes in a timely fashion, that can lead to Nacha fines and return payments. Because again, whichever bank is making that change, they are not going to continue to make that change forever. So make sure you're processing notice of changes. And I will tell you, when I was a practitioner, I actually had someone assigned to do the notice of changes, to process those as they come in. But because it's not something that was like immediate, that got, I don't know, had, an urgency to it, like some of the vendor requests that we get, and, everything's urgent in accounts payable. That was kind of put on the back burner when other projects came on, with when processing got behind. That would always be put on the back burner. And we did actually have, as a practitioner, I had one Nacha violation come in, and it was because I didn't realize that the one person that I assigned to do it didn't have enough time to do it, and only did it when she could find some spare time. And so I assigned it not only to another person, but I also assigned a backup as well. And so you may have to do something like that to make sure that it doesn't fall to the wayside as you get to month end, as you get to year end, as you get to busy periods. And then also perhaps have some type of a log. And I don't know if I added a log to that or not, but if it was that same kind of manual process as today, it would be logged. And that way I would have something to look at to verify that they were being done. And, when you document something and you start measuring it, somehow miraculously it starts being done. And so make sure that you at least have that in place, or something in place to ensure that it's always being done. All right. Now, the third way that you can find out that your vendor's bank routing number changed outside of the vendor telling you or the bank telling you with their notice of change is when you do your vendor master file cleanup. Yes. And so I always do that you do it on a monthly basis. And normally I recommend it on a monthly basis just because well, actually, two things. One, as vendors' information changes, and you're doing your validations, and you have to do follow-ups. Guess what? You don't have as many to do because the ones that happened the month before, you have already processed them. And so, the more often you do it, the less time it takes. But also, because a lot of the watch list, you can get in some cases, heavy fines, especially with OFAC, if you pay vendors that are on these lists. And if you don't have any other way to like continuously monitor them to make sure that they are, haven't been added to a list since you onboarded them or checked them last, then you could or your company could be susceptible to those heavy penalties and fines. And so I always recommend that you do it on a monthly basis. And when you do it on a monthly basis, again, it's a lot easier. But if you can't do it on a monthly basis, then do it on a quarterly basis. And the annual basis of a vendor master file cleanup, which I typically hear subscribers and clients talking about as if it's valid, it's just not valid. And most of the time when it's done in like the October, November time period because part of the vendor master file cleanup is doing the bulk upload for the IRS 10 match and really just trying to get prepared for the tax reporting that's going to happen in January. But the problem is that it's year end for most, and um, sometimes with these vendor validations, you have to follow up with those vendors, and it takes some time to reply back. And so definitely don't recommend it's once a year because now you've got to reach out to all the vendors whose validations were not successful that probably wouldn't have been successful in June had you done it in June, and they would be done by now. So I recommend you do it at least monthly. If you can't do it monthly, then do it quarterly. But when you do your vendor master file cleanup, one step of that is to check for closed banks, mergers, and acquisitions. And there are two resources that you can go to identify those. And so when I told you that there were five or six in 2023. So one, two, three, four, five. There were five. I was actually reading that from this resource, and it's from the FDIC themselves. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, but it's FDIC.gov, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.gov, so FDIC.gov. And so they have a failed banks list. And in 2026, there were two failed banks, one in January and one in May. Now, I will tell you that it gives you a couple of pieces of information. It'll give you the bank name, and then it will also give you the acquiring institution's name. But when you click on it, it does not give you like the uh, uh, routing number information. And so you'll have to do some research to identify that and or go back to your vendor. Now, you notice how when I talked about the notice of change, I didn't say anything about going back to the vendor and verifying it because bank. The bank has already made the change. And so that's not something, I mean, if it was a bank account number, yes, but that's not something that I would have typically have gone back to the vendor and verify that they, submit a new banking form for, but you can if you want. But in the case of trying to find any failed banks using this FDIC Gov page, it does not give that information unless I can't find it. So you may need to do some additional research, like going to the uh, Federal Reserve Board where you validate routing numbers, either ACH or Fed wire. You may have to validate that and then see that it's no longer good. And then search for the acquired bank's routing number. So that's failed banks. Now, there's another resource for closed bank mergers and acquisitions. And with this resource, what it tells you is the buyer information and the seller information. And so it doesn't have, again, routing numbers on it, but with this one, you can export it into an Excel file, and then you'll be able to match it based on the bank name. And again, you may have to do some additional research to get the routing numbers and for the seller, which should match your vendor records, and then the routing number for the buyer, which should replace the routing number in your vendor master file. Now, if you are having any qualms about making changes to the routing number without your vendor's consent, go ahead and just send them the instructions to update their banking and ask them for to complete the form and to submit whatever other forms or requirements you have. Now, to make this part easier or I guess more detailed to validate against, when you are entering in your vendor banking information, make sure you also enter in the branch address because sometimes with these mergers or acquisitions, the different branches may be included or they may not. So make sure that you always include or you always capture the bank branch address. And I say that knowing full well that when I was a practitioner, let's say, for example, in SAP, which is one of the 7 accounting systems or ERPs we had with vendor master files in them, it had a separate, I think it was called the BNKA table. And I will tell you that BNKA table consistently needed cleaning because bank branches or banks would merge and get acquired, and we wouldn't remove the old information from there, or somebody would put in would kind of fat finger the routing number, not knowing that the real routing number was already in there. We would Uh, find that out when the payment wasn't successful or the notice of change was done. But do you think that change would make it to the BNKA table and clean that part up? Nope, not always, because they would just replace the erroneous routing number with the right one because it was already in the BNKA table, and so they would just select that one, and the one that was put in there incorrectly was just never removed. And so we just had all kinds of a mess in that table. So just make sure that you're updating the applicable tables where you're capturing the bank information, bank branch information, really, the bank name and the address and the routing that is associated with that routing number. That probably needs to be a whole class or a whole podcast on its own. If I could remember everything we did or didn't do, I just remember that table, we all knew that it had, bad information. It had good information on it too, but we knew it needed to be cleaned up. All right, so that is all I have for you today. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 396th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.